we see Frank Benetti, along with his nephew Daniel, headed to a secluded place in the middle of nowhere for camping. The uncle and nephew joke around, and then take out their camping gear to set up their tent. The scene cuts to a woman who looks like she is meditating. Strange chanting voices sound around her as she tries hard to concentrate. Suddenly, her eyes open wide with shock, as if she heard the news of the world ending. Back at the campsite, Frank and Daniel sit together. They have a good and warm relationship. It is almost night, and they are huddled up around a campfire talking. The two talk about the existence of aliens, and Frank comments that there would be Armageddon if aliens exist. Daniel laughs. He asks his boldly preaching atheist uncle if he can prove the non-existence of God, and he merely remarks that since no one has proved his existence, he shouldn't care to prove otherwise. And moreover, he strongly believes that no one ever would, so Daniel should rest assured. Daniel gets immersed into the conversation, and continues by asking about the existence of ghosts since he saw them on YouTube. Frank laughs at his question. He believes YouTube to be the #1 hangout place for fraudsters. Ouch, Frank. Suddenly they are startled by a distant, terrifying roar. Frank tells him that if he believed in ghosts, he would certainly think that this sound belongs to one, but he doesn't, so he knows it must be a koala. He gets up to go to bed, and asks Daniel to set up the camera before coming in. We see the camera recording the surroundings as the two men sleep inside the tent. Moments later, Daniel wakes up, terrified, after hearing another distant roar. He calls out to his uncle, who dismisses him, thinking it must be nothing. But when Daniel pushes him once more with a pitifully scared expression, he gives in and finally gets up to check. He comes back inside and goes to sleep, not having found anything suspicious, despite Daniel's insistence that he is scared. A little later, he is again pushed awake by Daniel. But before he can get angry, his nephew points to a huge shadow of a man over their tent. Suddenly, he hears an animalistic growl. The man almost has a heart attack. He tells Daniel to stay put, and quickly goes out after the perpetrator, but when he gets out there, there's nobody inside. The situation keeps getting more and more creepy when they find that the camera that they turned on has also not recorded anything. He calls out to the terrified Daniel to get in the car. He begs his uncle to go home, but Frank tries to calm him down by saying that they'll stay the night in the car so they will know beforehand if anyone tries to attack them. The next morning, Frank gets a call from his girlfriend, named Sarah, who is a scientist. She urgently tells him of a major breakthrough that she has had in her experiment, and asks him to get there as soon as he can. As he cuts the call, Daniel shows him a strange red marking on his arm. The man dismisses him, saying it must be a bug bite. Yeah, right, Frank. I mean, all the bugs usually like to give creative and runic bites to humans. He also notices the same design on his arm, but dismisses it and quickly drives back to his girlfriend's abode. Upon his arrival, he meets Clint, one of his group members who makes vlogs on fake paranormal activity news, and fraudsters who claim to see and talk to spirits. Together, the three boys head towards Sarah's lab. There, Sarah shows them her experiment, through which she miraculously takes the life of a guinea pig and then revives him by injecting him with chemicals through her computer. All the people there are shocked at what they witnessed. Frank is too excited and asks if the experiment would work on a human. Sarah is quite confident that it would, but the only problem is who would be the guinea pig, who could possibly consensually take his life, with a half promise of being returned. Clint and Frank are ecstatic at the thought, thinking about the huge number of views and followers that they would get if they happened to pull off this huge breakthrough. Frank believes that with this, they could even have scientifically proven facts about the non-existence of an afterlife. Clint gets a call from someone, and comes back telling them that they might have just landed their guinea pig. Turns out a woman named Meredith Palin just called, asking to meet them at her place tomorrow. Frank says his goodbyes, and after a promise to meet later, he goes to drop off Daniel. Later in his house, he tries to seduce Sarah into letting him be the guinea pig, but she gets angry and storms off. The next day, Clint and Frank go to Meredith's place to take an interview from her. Meredith talks about talking to spirits and traveling to other places through meditation. Frank thinks all this is bullshit, and tries to talk her into admitting that she is nothing but a fraud. Meredith does not get angry at his rude behavior. Instead, she looks concerned. She looks at him and tries to convince him into giving up the experimental stunt that he has planned. She warns the man that he is walking dangerous grounds, and unless and until he wants to doom himself, along with everyone else, he should stop. Frank angrily storms off, not believing a single word she says. Back in the lab, we see Sarah holding up the mouse, who looks terrified and is writhing in pain, probably the side effects of being revived by this ruthless scientist more than 8 times. Poor mouse must have gone through hell and back. She then calls Frank and tells him that she has decided to let him do what he wants, but he would be the one administering the and he must sign papers that give his consent. The next day, they set up all the cameras and equipment before getting on with the experiment. The team goes live and records an all-time high number of viewers. Minutes before the experiment, Frank starts to have second thoughts and goes to Sarah for support. She assures him that according to the data, it should work. Needles are pricked and the machines are ready. Frank Benetti, on a live broadcast, presses the button to inject, and finally, writhing in pain, ends his life. 1 hour later, Sarah presses the button to bring him back. Everyone waits in anticipation, when suddenly, the experiment fails. In a desperate attempt, they use the defibrillator, but to no avail. Everyone is watching in utter terror at the turn of events. Daniel comes and desperately calls out to his uncle. Suddenly, a machine goes off, and Daniel falls to the floor. In the background, they hear the faint sound of the computer mentioning that the subject has been revived. Finally, after giving them the shock of their lifetime, Frank Benetti comes back to life. Their happiness is short-lived, as suddenly, the police arrive. They arrest Frank and Sarah for pulling such a prank. Frank argues with the police officer, but he tells him that Sarah has already admitted to pulling off a hoax. Frank is disappointed. Suddenly, he sees a pale-faced man enter the room and wonders aloud who that could be, but when the officer looks back, he finds no one. A creeped-out Frank exits the police station and meets Sarah, who admits to lying about the experiment. She tells him that they would have been in more trouble had she not lied. Together they go out to a restaurant to eat, where he once again sees the strange man, who disappears. Turns out that only he can see the man and no one else. He tells Sarah about these hallucinations, and they get into an argument. Sarah storms off after advising him to rest. He also gets a call from Clint, who tells him to urgently meet up. The next day, Frank goes to his sister's house, who doesn't let him meet Daniel as he has been blacklisted. Turns out Daniel also does not want to see him. He turns back to see a black car parked before him. He gets terrified after seeing strange smoke coming out of the front seat and a person struggling and banging the window. Suddenly, the car speeds down the road and disappears from his line of sight. Frank gets really disturbed after going through all these strange encounters. Later, he comes to meet Clint, who shows him the video footage of his experiment. And there, they see the same ghost who has been following him around, standing over him and smiling creepily up at the camera. Looking at the man, Frank suddenly sees a vision of a beautiful plain filled with greenery and a golden core shining bright. He then sees a man in a hospital who magically gets healed. All the while, he keeps hearing a soothing voice, which claims that he has the power to heal. He is brought back to reality with Clint's voice asking what is wrong with him. A highly disturbed Frank now gets up and abruptly leaves, making the clueless Clint wonder what the hell is wrong with him. Outside, he sees a ghostly woman sprawled on the footpath, with a book titled, "Is There an Afterlife?" opened in her lap. Poor Frank runs towards his car and storms inside. When he hears a knock, he doesn't even stay to look and speeds down to his house. For a man who does not believe in ghosts, all this must be tragic. Back home, while watching television, he keeps hearing stuff move. His heart races, but when the television suddenly turns off, he has had enough. The poor man springs up and is ready to strike anything that appears. Back in the kitchen, the oven bangs open and hits the floor. The horrified Frank, with his heart on his sleeve, records all the paranormal activity on his phone and then runs out to his car. He quickly calls Sarah to let her know that he wants to sleep over and drives off to her house. At Sarah's place, he tells her about all the paranormal activity and even shows the clip, but the woman just won't believe him. She says that it's all in his head, and when that doesn't work, she blames Meredith, saying that she is playing pranks on him. Sarah is not convinced, but Frank starts to have doubts about his belief. After encountering all these ghosts, he is now not so sure about the non-existence of God, which he boldly preached before his execution experiment. The next day, he tries to log into their website, but is unable to access it. He calls Clint to ask, who reveals that upon Sarah's order, he changed the password, and he can't give it to him unless she says so. It must have been due to last night's encounter, when Frank admitted to having doubts about their cause. Now all alone and kicked out of his group, Frank sits aimlessly before his computer screen, wondering what he can do. Suddenly, he hears a noise and goes out into the lounge. The lights go out, and he turns on the torch to look around. A strange, ghostly man appears behind him, and when Frank turns around, the terrifying man attacks him, making him fall down. A strange, dark vision pops up in his head, where he sees flames and a devil reaching out to grab him. A demon hovers above him, and he passes out. The next morning, he wakes up to find his house in a total mess. Defeated, he goes to take a shower and clean up, when suddenly Meredith's name pops up in his head like a glimmer of hope. He quickly gets dressed and runs off to meet the woman. There, he tells her all about the encounters, and asks her to help him. She examines his soul, and tells him that after traveling to the astral plane using his execution stunt, he attracted a demonic entity, which has attached itself to his soul and is haunting him. She also tells him that her presence can protect him. Turns out, the man has also gained some superpowers, as Meredith claims to see what he can do. Together they go to a hospital, where Frank sees the same man whom he saw in a vision earlier, and he miraculously heals the man. After helping the man, Frank gets almost drained, and together, they limp out of the hospital. Afterwards, they visit Meredith's house, where she performs a ritual, and together, they visit the astral plane. There, Frank sees the light being, who warns him of a portal that he opened in his previous stunt and led darkness to the planet. After wishing him success, the light being disappears. Back in Meredith's abode, she tells him that the demons have invaded the Earth, and it is now up to them to try and save it. Overwhelmed with information, the poor man runs out to get some fresh air. He stands outside, thinking about all the strange things that happened to him in the few days following his reincarnation. Meredith follows him out and creeps out the poor man even more by saying that they need to transform him into an avatar. Wow, Meredith, a little pre-warning would have been nice. Poor Frank freaks out even more, and after leaving her there, he rushes out. What does she even mean by turning the man into an avatar? Frank hurries out while Meredith keeps calling out to him, warning that he would be in danger if he leaves her side, but the man does not listen. Leaving her house, Frank goes to a pub to relax his mind and have a few drinks. There, the bartender asks if he is having a bad day. As he looks at her, the woman's eyes turn cold and menacing. On her arm he sees the tattoo of the same evil man that was recorded on his experiment video. He quickly gets up to leave, but the door is blocked by another man. Using a side entrance, he exits the bar, but the day does not seem to be on his side, as he is forcefully abducted in a black car by the forces of the dark. The car pulls up to an abandoned warehouse, where the poor man is and dragged around in a cage. Suddenly a pale, demonic woman approaches him. His breathing gets faster by the minute, and he has a vision where he sees the demon and a captive man on a term cross. The visions creep him out. As he opens his eyes, he finds himself back in the car, with the same demonic woman and the man who abducted him earlier. They drive off after abandoning him near the same bar. It seems like they only abducted him as a warning, and our man Frank takes it seriously as he goes to Meredith the next day for help. Meredith decides to help him, and starts teaching him about different stuff such as mind reading, psychokinesis, and protection. Together, they go on walks to practice the mind reading trick. With time, Frank learns to expand his mind and learn more about the extent of his powers. He helps a woman, and the once atheist tells her that it is God who helped her, and not him. Turns out Frank, after all that he has been through, finally accepts the existence of God and more strongly than ever before. Through his transformative journey, Frank's faith in God grows stronger than ever before, shaping his newfound purpose in life. He keeps learning and growing under Meredith's supervision. That night, he has a dream where he sees the light being, who tells him about his powers. He has the power of light which can help destroy the demons. The light being encourages him to use his power and end the darkness that has seeped into this world with his avatar power. The next day he wakes up with newfound spirit and zeal. He records a vlog with the title Tabernacle 101, in which he tells his audience about the afterlife and his newfound belief in it. The next few days, he goes around and shows people his tricks, from vanishing in thin air to appearing in other places out of nowhere. He slowly starts to build his audience. Back at home, he gets a call from Sarah. Turns out she is cheating on him with Clint. They invite him onto their show, but he cuts off the call after declining the offer. Coming back, he and Meredith do time travel again. They see screens with computer codes, and then Frank lands in a closed alley where he finds Daniel and follows him. But suddenly the vision ends, and he is back in the room. During the ritual, Meredith finds out that they only have 2 days before the demons take over. Since they saw computer screens and codes, the demons must be doing something with technology. She tells him that they must go and meet his nephew because he is in trouble. Suddenly, Frank gets a call from his sister, who invites him to Daniel's birthday party. The duo get ready to go and confront any demons that might be there. At the party, they find Daniel has become very rude since his execution stunt. He misbehaves with his mother and talks back menacingly to everyone. During the party, Meredith decides to go and check out Daniel's room to search for anything that might help them, but suddenly the demon comes and attacks her, joined by Daniel. Poor Meredith is saved after Daniel's mom suddenly barges in and sees her crouching helplessly in the corner. Soon, they leave the house. In the car, Meredith tells Frank about the demon's plan to plant a virus on the dark web to shut down all the systems on Earth. She found this out after snooping around in Daniel's room. Turns out, after invading Earth, the mighty demons have also opted for a technological war. Pretty intelligent. She shows a timer to Frank and tells him that when it hits 0, the virus is going to explode out of the dark web and spread out to the wider world. Back at home, Frank creates a new vlog, warning everyone that the demons will be taking control of the internet tomorrow. He advises everyone to get rid of their mobile phones, laptops, or whatever is connected to the internet, since they don't know what might happen tomorrow. They quickly upload the video, and Frank decides to go out to grab some drinks, leaving Meredith behind. As Frank fights off another relentless attack from the demonic forces hell-bent on claiming his soul, he finds himself on the verge of succumbing to their malevolent grasp. But just as darkness threatens to consume him, the radiant light being appears, wielding ethereal power to shield Frank from his assailants. Overwhelmed and weakened, Frank collapses, slipping into unconsciousness. When he awakens the following morning, his eyes are met with the reassuring sight of Meredith, who stands faithfully by his side. In a surprising revelation, Frank learns that it was Meredith, his steadfast companion and guide, who intervened and rescued him from the clutches of the nefarious demon. The two quickly call up Sarah and Clint to ask them for help. They meet in the cafe, where Frank tries hard to tell them that they don't have time, but Sarah laughs it off, considering it a joke. She grabs Frank's phone and hands it to Clint, who counts down to 0 along with the timer. As the timer hits 0, suddenly all the phones in the shop start ringing, and whoever looks at their phone passes out. Everyone else except Frank, Meredith, and Sarah pass out in the cafe. As fear grips Sarah's heart and her pulse races, she struggles to comprehend the shocking sight before her. Summoning her courage, she rushes to Clint's side, desperate to ensure his safety amidst the chaos unfolding around them. Outside, a scene of utter devastation unfolds as cars collide and pandemonium reigns. Frank tells Sarah that they need her help to fight this darkness. Together, they decide to do the experiment again so that Frank can go back and close the portal that he accidentally opened from the other side before. The trio quickly move towards the lab and set up all the things there. Meredith gives Frank a pendant so that his powers will be magnified on the other side. Soon, they initiate the experiment, and Frank is once more lethally injected. In a desperate attempt to save his sister, Frank's spirit transcends to her house, only to discover a horrifying sight: his nephew Daniel, possessed by an otherworldly force. The possessed Daniel scorns Frank for arriving too late, but his attention is quickly drawn to the arrival of another menacing demon, the very same man who has haunted his journey from the beginning. He points Frank towards a computer screen, which reveals a chilling sight. Clint, who is possessed, lurks in the lab near his lifeless body. He holds the demon's cross, and using its power, the man sears Frank's flesh to etch a burning upside-down cross, a symbol of Satan. The man goes outside to reveal Sarah and Meredith tied to a tree. Clint takes Sarah's life in cold blood and drags a captive Meredith right before Frank's eyes, but the poor helpless man can do nothing to save them. He watches helplessly as Clint drags Meredith and burns her poor body. Burning with rage, Frank looks at the possessed Daniel, who smiles back at him. Suddenly, he starts having visions of succumbing to the darkness, but the voice of Meredith helps him out during his misery and guides his spirit to the light. He finds himself in a beautiful meadow with Meredith, who tells him that the medallion she gave him guided her to his spirit. Soon they are joined by the light being, and Frank begs her for help. With all the light and power accumulated in his body, his spirit comes back to Earth to find the demons. One by one he takes them out, and finally restores the peace and quiet. Daniel finally gets free from the bloody demon who possessed him. Frank goes out to help his sister, and then goes back to his lifeless body. Using the power of the light, he removes the dark cross, and every ounce of evil along with it. Finally, he wakes up into a demon-free world. The movie ends with a happy Frank rejoicing with his family, and getting stalked by the spirit of Meredith, who keeps following him around and telling him about the people who need his help.